Thank you for joining us, everyone, today. My name is Becca Clark, and I'm the student recruiter for Thunderbird's online programs, degree programs. It is my pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Ted Cross, Clinical Assistant Professor of Leadership and Academic Director of the Master of Applied Leadership and Management at Thunderbird. Thank you, Dr. Cross.
Thank you, Becca. It's great to be with everyone this morning. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about self-leadership, personal leadership, and purpose. I wanted to begin by telling a story from Lewis Carroll's classic novel, Alice in Wonderland. There's a certain scene in the book where Alice is lost in a magical world and she comes to tea in a path. She doesn't know which way to go, and she stumbles upon a Cheshire cat, a magical cat that can talk to her. And she asks the question to the cat, "Which way should I go?" The cat asks her back, "Well, where do you want to end up?" And then Alice says, "Well, I don't really much care where I go." And the cat responds, "Well, it doesn't much matter which path you take then." I think many times in life and in leadership, especially within the organizations we work for, we are often like Alice. We haven't picked a very strategic way to think about our own personal purpose, our own organizational mission, and the direction in which we're headed and where we will lead others. So today I want to start by talking about self-leadership and personal purpose from the point of view that we spend lots and lots of money on figuring out organizational strategic plans, organizational missions and visions and values, but it's not very often that we stop and think, what about our own personal mission, our own personal purpose, and how can we use that to lead others? In other words, it's not very inspiring for members of our organizations to follow someone who doesn't know what their own personal purpose is. Why would anyone follow us unless we knew where we were heading? But where do we start when we start thinking about purpose and meaning and our own personal mission statement? Well, the first place I would like to start is in the domain of work. Now, there's a whole bunch of scholarship around the topic of meaningful work, and scholars have interviewed lots and lots of employees and also people who work for themselves, entrepreneurs, executives, and they've asked them, different questions about how they feel about their jobs. And these scholars have come up with a categorization that most people fall into one of these four categories that you see on your screen. Some people feel that their work is just a job, so they're going there to earn a paycheck. Other people feel that their work is a career. In other words, they are feeling that yes, they're getting paid, but they're in a career mindset. They're looking to climb the ladder and they're getting positive feedback from moving up. Some people feel that their work is a calling, so they feel that they're doing this their job because there's a higher purpose, something bigger than themselves. And then even further, some people believe that their work is a vocation, and that means that people feel that a higher power not only is helping them work towards a greater cause through their work, but also that they were made for that specific role. So the reason I bring this up is that we need to think about how we can find meaning in our own work and how we can also express that in a way that makes sense to others. Now, as I will talk about later, it's not just that we should define ourselves solely by the domain of work, as we'll talk about in a minute, but rather this is where we spend a lot of our time, and so it's often a good starting place. One quick story from a study by Thompson and Bunderson. They had an interesting question, they're management school professors, and they noticed something very strange about zookeepers. Zookeepers, they noticed, had lots and lots of harsh work conditions. They had a lot of things that they had to deal with, and they actually don't get paid that much. Yet, when they looked at the data, they noticed that there were many, many applicants for every zookeeper job opening. So these two social scientists, management professors were interested in why would it be that there is so many job applicants for a single zookeeper position when they don't get paid that much, their conditions can be kind of dirty. It's not something in society that is often seen as a high status job. Why would there be so many applicants for a zookeeper's job? Now, they interviewed lots and lots of people who were zookeepers to find out the answer to their question. And this is a quote that they kind of came up with because as they were interviewing these zookeepers, they noticed that the zookeepers framed their work as a calling or a vocation rather than just a job or a career. Now, here's the definition of calling from Thompson and Bunderson. They say, calling is that place in the world of productive work that one was created, designed, or destined to fill by virtue of God-given gifts and talents and the opportunities presented by one's state in life. Now, this quote might sound a little bit spiritual, but this is the sense that people had in responding, the zookeepers rather, in responding to the questions of Thompson and Bunderson. They were describing their work in this sense of being destined to be a zookeeper, to take care of these animals. They felt called to this work to do something for a greater purpose. And because of that, they were willing to endure harsh conditions and work for lower pay because they were motivated not by being a career climber, not by a paycheck necessarily, though that is necessary. They were motivated because they felt that their personal purpose and destiny aligned with this type of job. Now, we all know people that their jobs seem to have an inherent sense of calling. Maybe you have a friend who is a firefighter or someone who's a nurse, and it seems pretty easy for them to be able to make purpose and sense out of what they do every day. You know, they save lives or they help people get well, and but it's not always that easy for the rest of us. I remember reading a study that was describing an interview with someone who mopped the floors inside of a hospital, and most of the workers who were on the cleaning staff that they interviewed didn't really view their work as more than a job. They thought it was a job, but this one person that they interviewed really viewed their work as a calling, and they were wondering why, so they asked more questions. And the person said, I'm not just mopping floors, I'm helping people get well. And so they reframed their work in a way to infuse it with more purpose and see how they're contributing to the whole of the entire organizational mission rather than just thinking of their task in a small light and in a smaller scale. But what about the rest of us? Well, one thing we need to notice, especially across different cultures, is that identity, especially in Western society, is often tied up in work. We often define ourselves by our work. This is particularly American. And one story that I was reading recently, if you look at the picture on your left, this is just a generic photo of a place in Europe, but I was reading a travel account of a businessman who went on a trip to Europe, and he was walking down the street, and as Americans often do, he said, "How are you?" to the first person he saw. Surprisingly, they stopped and started telling him actually how they were. And then they asked him where he was from. And he explained and had a good conversation with this person. A couple weeks later, the same businessman was at home at a dinner in the United States. And he was meeting some new friends at this dinner for the first time. And the first question they asked wasn't, where are you from? But rather, what do you do? And so in American society often, and many Western societies, our identity is often based upon what kind of work we do. And that's often the first question that we're asked. So we have to ask ourselves, are we tying up our entire identity inside of this job box, this single part of our life? Or are we being more purpose-driven? Are we being more purpose-driven? Now, it's easy for people to be purpose-driven like the zookeepers or the nurses or the firefighters because their job is very particularly aligned with some sort of obvious purpose. But is it so good for us to solely base our identity and our purpose on the world of work? And I would argue it's not. Our calling or our purpose in life is not job specific. Now, the reason I say that is because it's very risky to tie up your purpose or your major identity, self-identity, in the job specific domain of life, because sometimes jobs change. Sometimes economies change. Sometimes you move from one thing to the next. And if you do, and you have your entire identity tied up in that specific domain of life, you are very likely to be disappointed. So I suggest that our calling or our personal purpose should not be job specific, and it should be able to transcend across lots of different areas of our life. We'll talk about that in a minute. Another myth I'd like to bust right now is also there is no perfect job for everyone out there that will then make you happy. It's about finding ways to infuse it with meaning from your own personal purpose. So that also helps, because if we are not tying our whole identity and our well-being and happiness and our purpose to a specific job, we're less likely to be disappointed if things change or if our job or career search doesn't pan out. Now, I wanted to talk about an interesting phenomenon in Japan, specifically in Okinawa. And you see at the top of your screen, life, death in Japan. And the first thing I wanted to mention, this is a general fact. This is not Japanese specific, but this is from several different studies, that the two most likely times that people will die is either after they are born because of infant mortality, so right at the beginning of our lives, or right after they retire. So people often ask the question, why would people be more likely to die right after they retire? Well, especially in Western societies, identity is tied up in work. And when you retire, you lose a huge part of your identity, your purpose and motivation to live. One reason why National Geographic demographers believe that people live longer in Okinawa is because they have a cultural norm called ikigai. Ikigai is the notion that everyone should have a defined life purpose, some sort of thing that wakes you up every morning. This could be someone who continues to teach martial arts well into their 70s or 80s. This could be someone who their purpose is to tend their garden, but this is a lifelong purpose, an ikigai. I think that we would do well to take a page from Japan's culture, especially in Okinawa, that we need to have a lifelong purpose. Yes, it will shift over time, but something that transcends outside the world of work. If not, we are likely to get depressed after we retire or change jobs or things change, because so much of our identity can be tied up in the world of work. Now, how can the rest of us whose job is not obviously purposeful from the outside looking in, how do we find our own calling? Well, first, I'm arguing that we should not just tie everything up in the world of work, but also we should think of new models of examining our lives and the purpose that we find within it. When I was at the Wharton School of Business, I met Dr. Stu Friedman, and I took his class called Total Leadership. It's a great book also that you can pick up on Amazon or anywhere else. And he is a very interesting professor who helped me understand more about this idea of work-life balance. The first thing that he taught us is that work-life balance is a myth. There is no such thing. Now, this is going to bother some people, but if we really step back and think about this idea of balance between work and life, it's not very logical. Most of us have to work, 10 hours a day at work, and you see an icon there on your screen, and then to be equal and balanced, we'd need to spend 10 hours a day on ourselves, 10 hours with our family, and 10 hours in the community. So it only takes, 40 hours a day to have a really balanced life. And the problem with this model is, and this is what Stu Friedman points out, is that if we have a demanding or a regular job even, this balance model demands a zero-sum game. In other words, if I have 10 hours of work, I must equal that out with 10 hours in the other areas of my life. Or if I subtract out hours from my family life, for example, then I need to subtract out hours from the work domain. This is the idea of balance. Balance is zero-sum. You add some to one side, you have to add some to the other, or take some away from one side, you have to take some away from the other. So it's not a very useful model. And I think that this is one of the most pernicious sort of phrases that we use in self-leadership and in management studies. Work-life balance is not possible, and we set up a sort of expectation that cannot ever be met. It's an ideal that can never be met. If you can't meet the ideal, you become very disillusioned quickly. So what's the alternative? How about work-life integration rather than balance? And this is what Friedman talks about. So if we think about it, in general, we can sort of agree and we can have a little bit of differentiation here, but there's 4 basic domains of our lives. There's the home domain, whatever that means for you, community, and that is identified for you. So for me, that's church. It could be working at an animal shelter or something like that on a volunteer basis, somehow involved with their community. Work, which is obvious, and then self. You know, we have to take care of ourselves some. Now, the idea isn't to balance these different domains, but rather to integrate them into each other. So what I would like to discuss here is how can we have a personal purpose that would go across all these domains, and then how do we integrate these domains and use them leveraged against the other. So let me go back to this job-centric purpose that most of us have. When we're asked, what do you do? We say, I am a teacher, and we define our identity through our work, which isn't so useful because, personal example, if I say I am a teacher, that works at work. It might be able to work in my community domain if I find some sort of service that is teacher-like or education-related. But when I go home, if I'm always tying up my identity as a teacher, I start to irritate my wife when I'm trying to give her lectures about organizational behavior, right? And just talk about that. Or in the self domain, is that my entire identity? So can we find something rather that isn't job specific, but is a personal purpose that can cut across all these or transcend all these domains to help integrate the entire person or our entire selves into an area, into a purpose that is cohesive? Now, one thing that I'll also mention is that we need to make sure that as we're thinking about work-life integration, that we are thinking of it not in that balance mentality, but rather how can we actually have a win in one domain that will equal a win in the other. Let me move back to this for 1 second. Let me give you an example. Friedman calls these 4-way wins. So we have these 4 domains up here. Now, for example, if I have a really terrible work situation, I'm likely to bring that terrible work situation home, and it'll negatively affect home. It'll probably cut out the time and energy I have for my community because I'm stressed at work. And then likely it will have some effects on the self domain, either health-wise or psychologically or other, right? I think one of the best measures of how stressful a workplace is watching how much weight people gain or lose over a given time period. If you've been in a stressful work environment, you'll notice that people are gaining weight lots around you, including yourself, or some people will lose a lot of weight. And that's because that's a direct response to the amount of stress in the workplace. Now, another way to think about this on the positive side is that if you have something positive in one of these domains, it can spill over into the other. So in the self domain, for example, one of the best ways that we can optimize all of these different domains is through exercise and self-care. If I exercise and I take care of myself, I'm more likely to have more energy for work. Then in work, I'll probably have a little bit better mood and I'll bring that home. And I might have a little bit more energy to go and do some things in my community. So we need to think of ways that we can have those 4-way wins And one way is through the spillover effect that I'm describing here, where one thing in one domain positively affects the other. Or another way is called simultaneity. And this doesn't work for everything, but this is the idea of combining domains in a positive way. So for example, I might have a work party I need to attend. If I can integrate my family with that, or my home life with that, by bringing along my spouse or my children to the company picnic, I'm killing two birds with one stone, right? I'm integrating two areas. In the self domain, I might be able to walk on the treadmill and listen to the books that I need to keep abreast of what I need to know for work. This doesn't work all the time, right? You can't do 7 things at once, but sometimes you can integrate 2 things into each other. Is home and your community compatible together, that you can do those every so often, certain activities that would give you a win that way? And then also optimizing through the spillover effect we described before, to be able to say, okay, what is my purpose across all these domains that will help me have a cohesive sense of self and be able to find ways to create positive effects in each domain? So how do you actually, though, find your own transcendent purpose? Everybody knows that we sort of need a mission statement. Famously, Simon Sinek says in his TED Talk that nobody cares about what you do, they care about why you do it. Let me say that again. Nobody cares about what you do, they care about why you do it. So we might ask the question, what do you do in American society and other Western societies? But the idea really is, are you an interesting purpose, and have you found purposeful and meaningful work, or have a meaningful transcendent purpose? Now, here's one example of a way to move through a process to understand what your own personal purpose might be. I call this the transcendent purpose methodology. As you can see across the top, I have listed the different domains: self, family, community, and work. And then below that, I have places to list actions that someone likes or loves, and actions that someone does not like or hates. And the reason I'm using the words love and hate is because I really want to ask people to think about polar opposites of actions. And the reason I'm focusing on actions in each of these domains is because it's about things that you are doing, not things that you think that you would like to do or not like to do, actual things that you do or don't do in your life. Now, when I was working through a lot of this research a number of years ago, I started talking with my wife, Stephanie, about what is her personal purpose. And we came up with this methodology to describe it. This is her own personal self-research that is here on this slide that she's allowed me to share. But if you see at the top in the self, there's nothing listed. There's a blank because that area is for the stakeholders within each domain. So for self, it's just you, so you don't have anything there. Family, there's different stakeholders. There's me and there's her family, etc. Under community, it's our church, her local gym, those kinds of things in her community. Under work is she's in real estate, and she also likes doing some hobbies that she's listed underneath there for some side projects. So these are the different types of stakeholders and different types of components that make up each domain. So you can list those there. And then below, in the actions you love and the actions you hate, you will list the different things you hate to do in each domain. So for example, in self, she likes doing yoga, photography, and hosting parties. Things she does not like doing is not being in control. She doesn't like writing. She doesn't like some of the house chores, right? In family and community, she's listed a bunch of things. Let's skip over to work for a practical example. She loves the negotiating and creating things people like and helping them find a home and create future memories. That's through the real estate work she does. But she doesn't like the paperwork and the pressure of closing a deal. And if she feels like she didn't get the very, very best deal, which she usually does get the best deal, but if she feels like there's a little more room she could have got for her clients, she does not like that. So the first thing to do is to fill out this sort of worksheet, and we can send you a copy of this worksheet if you contact Becca and I, and fill this out. And then the next page is to start looking, is there any themes across the things you like to do and the things you don't like to do? And then do you have any ideas that you can do, any purpose ideas that came out of that? Now, let me show you another step once you start filling this out that is very important. As you fill out that first page and you're done and you've sort of filled out a little bit on the back, the idea is to go back and do some qualitative thematic research on yourself. You'll go back and you'll circle those things that you see that are similar across the actions that you love. And then you can put a box or a star by, whatever you want to do, something different around the actions that you hate. And then on the next side, you're looking for themes that came out of those different circles and boxes that you've made. Now, Stephanie listed that the theme she saw, she likes being with people across all the different domains of her life. She likes doing things for others, making people happy, being creative, and being a helping type person. So some purpose ideas she came up with then were serve, happiness, be creative. And I kept asking her and badgering her with questions. And I said, well, really, why do you do all these things that you like to do across the different life domains? And she said, well, because I like to make people smile, right? Now that might seem very simple and very abstract. And the point is, it is abstract because it can fit across all the different domains. Her purpose is making people smile. So in the self domain, she's able to do that through the different activities and hobbies she likes. Through family, she can make people smile. Through visiting others and the different actions she has listed there. In her work, as she is helping people in real estate and in other aspects of consulting. She is helping people find a better way of doing things or a better way of living, and that helps make people smile. If you can find a transcendent purpose that works across all of these, you are less at risk to be tying up your entire identity inside of just one domain. My personal purpose is actually to help people be better, to move forward, right? That could be through organizations, that could be through teaching, that could be through church work or different types of hobbies that I have. But the idea is that it's not job specific. We need to think of these. If you think about a lot of advice you may have been given previously about finding your own mission statement, it is often very job specific. And I'm saying that that's not very useful because it only applies to one domain of your life. Find something, and it's okay. This will take lots of time and lots of iterations, and it will change over time. But what is your cause? You know, what is your purpose? I love the story that Simon Sinek tells about Apple computers. And he says, what's their purpose? And he says, it's not just to sell computers, it's to challenge the status quo. Now they do that through making computers, and then now they do it through phones, wireless earbuds, Apple Watches, software, iTunes, cloud services, Beats that they acquired, which is the headphone company, right? They're challenging the status quo. That is their ethos. What is your ethos? What is your why? What is your transcendent purpose? Now, I'd like to end there. We were glad to send you over this worksheet to work through this, and we're also glad to help your organization to move through this at an executive level if you'd like to contact us. But we'd also like to invite you to apply to our Masters of Applied Leadership and Management program. We have an entire class called Personal Leadership and Development that goes over many of these concepts and helps you to build your own personal strategic plan. Just like we mentioned in the beginning, companies invest lots of money in building strategic plans with visions, missions, and values. We should be doing the same for ourselves, but it should be from a holistic life integration perspective rather than working through the myopic lens of work-life balance.